I'm Jessica Minton for IB Times TV, and I'm here on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange where stocks were down after the European Central Bank president disappointed investors after indicating that any central bank intervention wouldn't happen until September at the earliest. Stephen Guilfoyle, who's an economist for Meridian Equity Partners, will be speaking with us about the central bank's latest move, as well as consumer sentiment and confidence data. The European Central Bank President, Mario Draghi, said on Thursday that while the ECB is prepared to actively intervene in the rescue of European markets, it wouldn't replace any bailout packages.
The first thing is that governments have to go to the EFSF. Because, as I said several times, the ECB cannot replace governments or cannot replace the action that other institutions have to do on the fiscal side.
Draghi indicated that any ECB intervention would start at the earliest in September and would depend on countries in trouble and on bond markets making a request and accepting strict conditions and supervision. Will an ECB intervention in September be less likely if they're waiting for these governments to have the money?
Well, first off, they need the governments to ask for help, and nothing's going to happen until they ask for help. Today's seen as a huge disappointment because nothing really happened. I think, given the problems that exist, at least into mid-September, what they could have done today and should have done today, they should have offered a large, maybe 5-year LTRO, something to shore up the banking sector in Europe. That would have at least kept the sharks at bay today. Instead we have a big, I don't know if you want to call it a collapse, but a big sell-off in European equities, in North American equities across the board. And it really, I think it hurts Mario Draghi's credibility, where he talked the markets up last week. He said strong words. He really did push the markets higher, and he really did allow them to collapse. So when you have that kind of power, you have to be much more responsible with your words, and I'm very, very disappointed in the president of the ECB.
The Federal Reserve stopped short of offering new monetary stimulus on Wednesday, even as it signaled more strongly that further bond buying could be in store to help an economic recovery that it said had lost momentum this year. Fed officials described the economy as having decelerated somewhat, a change of tone from its previous assessment in June when it said the economy had been expanding moderately. The Federal Reserve yesterday announced that they're keeping monetary policy on hold. Do you foresee the Fed raising interest rates anytime earlier than late 2014?
No, they won't be raising interest rates. They're going to keep them low for a very long time. The real question is, will we see some kind of monetary policy actions taken at the Jackson Hole meeting in September? The answer is most likely. All right. I don't know if you're watching the balance sheet, but it's been shrinking for the last 6 months. Very, very quietly, hardly anyone's noticing, but they are shrinking it as if they are preparing to do something. Now, will that be a large quantitative easing 3 program? Quite possibly. What I think they really need to do is do something complex, though, akin to the Bank of England's funding for lending program, where they take a somewhat punitive action towards stashing cash at the central bank overnight, and they reward the extension of credit with cheaper credit itself. Sort of a Pavlovian dog trick where they zap the party, the accused or whatever, and they reward the guy who does the right thing.
According to a private sector report released on Tuesday, consumer confidence unexpectedly rose in July. The Conference Board said its index of consumer attitudes climbed to 65.9 from an upwardly revised 62.7 in June, topping economists' expectations for a decline to 61.5. Yet a separate survey showed that consumer sentiment fizzled in July, falling to its lowest level of the year. The Thomson Reuters and University of Michigan's final reading on the overall index on consumer sentiment fell to 72.3 from 73.2 in June. It was the second month in a row that attitudes have soured, and the lowest level since December. Data showed that consumer confidence was up in July, yet consumer sentiment was down. Which data is correct, and what's more important to look at?
Well, it's an anomaly, but they both can be sort of correct. Okay, they do different things. The Conference Board's number, which is consumer confidence, is a survey of 3,000. The University of Michigan's number, consumer sentiment, is a survey of 500. The University of Michigan's number is much more about consumer spending, while the Conference Board's number is looks out about 6 months. So it's more of a questionnaire, not so much tied to the actual spending of money. So while they are closely related, and you can't talk about the consumer here in the U.S. without both of them, they don't exactly measure the same thing. And neither one of them was that out of whack with consensus. So while they are moving in slightly different directions, they're both in the ballpark.
This week was a busy week for central banks as the Federal Reserve, ECB, and Bank of England all had meetings. The Bank of England decided it was too soon to step up efforts to help Britain's economy and kept interest rates at a record low 0.5%. I'm Jessica Minton for IB Times TV reporting from the New York Stock Exchange.